Daniel's chest tightened. Better than someone who loves her like her own mother would have? Margaret, that girl looks at you like you hung the moon. That's what matters. For the first time, Margaret let her tears fall, though she quickly brushed them away. It was in that moment that Daniel realized something had shifted. His feelings toward her were no longer just gratitude, they were something deeper, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel since his wife's passing. It terrified him as much as it gave him hope. But life on the frontier was never without trials. That spring, a fierce storm swept across the plains. Lightning struck a tree near the barn, setting the roof ablaze. Daniel and Margaret worked frantically, buckets of water passing between them as rain poured down. Lily cried from the porch, calling for her father. The fire was fierce, but together, they managed to save most of the barn. When the flames finally died, the three of them stood soaked and shivering in the mud. Margaret's hands were blistered, her face streaked with ash. Daniel reached for her, his heart pounding with both fear and relief. "You saved everything," he said, his voice raw. Margaret shook her head. "We saved it. Together." But the storm had taken more than just the barn roof. The cattle had scattered, and a week later, when Daniel went to gather them, he found several dead from the lightning. The loss was a heavy blow to their already fragile finances. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Daniel stared into the flames with a heavy heart. "Maybe it's time I give up the ranch," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "The bank will come for it sooner or later." Lily gasped, her eyes wide with panic. "Papa, no." She turned to Margaret, pleading. "Tell him we can't lose home." Margaret's gaze was firm, steady. "Daniel Harper, don't you dare give up on this land. Your wife built her dreams here. Your daughter is growing up here. And you," she leaned closer, her voice fierce, "you were made for this life. Don't let hardship steal that from you." Her words struck him like thunder. For so long, he had carried his burden in silence, believing he alone had to hold everything together. But Margaret stood before him now, unwavering, demanding he see the truth, he wasn't alone anymore. The following week, Margaret surprised him by organizing a gathering at the ranch. She invited neighbors, families who had once turned a blind eye to Daniel's struggles. She baked bread, Lily picked wildflowers for the tables, and together they created a warm, welcoming space. At first, Daniel worried no one would come. But as the sun set, wagons began arriving. Families brought pies, blankets, and laughter. It was the first time in years that the Harper Ranch was filled with music and joy. Children ran through the fields, Lily among them, her laughter echoing like bells. Margaret stood beside Daniel, her eyes shining as she watched the life return to the ranch. Samadi from behind her father and smiled shyly at Margaret. "Do you know how to braid hair?" she asked, holding out her doll with its tangled strands. Margaret crouched, her large hand surprisingly gentle as she took the doll. "I reckon I do." Daniel's heart tightened. He had no idea who this woman truly was or why she had come, but as he watched his daughter's face light up, he knew one thing: perhaps fate had sent Margaret at the very moment he needed someone most. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep, Daniel and Margaret sat by the fire. The crackling flames cast shadows on the walls as silence stretched between them. Finally, Daniel asked, "Why are you really here?" Margaret looked into the fire, her expression unreadable. "Because I know what it is to lose everything. My husband died 3 years ago. I worked his farm alone until the bank took it. Folks looked at me like I was too big, too different to belong. But I know how to work the land. And I know how to fight for what's worth keeping. You still have your daughter, your ranch, but you won't keep either if you don't let someone in." Her honesty disarmed him. Daniel had expected pity, maybe judgment, but not this raw truth. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. "And what do you want in return?" Margaret's gaze met his. A place to belong. Daniel didn't sleep much that night. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her words echoing in his mind. A place to belong. Wasn't that what he wanted too, though he hadn't dared admit it since his wife's passing? The days that followed revealed Margaret's strength. She rose before dawn, tending to the animals, mending fences, even showing Daniel new ways to stretch their supplies. She worked tirelessly, her presence filling the ranch with a vitality it hadn't known in years. Lily adored her, following her everywhere, laughing in a way Daniel hadn't heard since his wife's laughter faded. But it wasn't just Margaret's labor that changed the ranch, it was her spirit. She carried herself with a quiet dignity, never complaining, never faltering, even when tasks left her blistered and bruised. She didn't ask for thanks, yet Daniel found himself wanting to give it. Still, part of him resisted. Letting Margaret in meant opening a door he had nailed shut long ago. And every time he caught himself watching her braid Lily's hair, or humming softly while she worked, he felt a pang of guilt, as though he were betraying the memory of his late wife. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky, Margaret spoke. "You're not failing, Daniel. You're just human. And no one survives this life alone." Her words, simple yet profound, sank deep into his heart. He realized then that maybe the greatest strength wasn't in carrying every burden himself, but in allowing someone else to help bear the weight. Weeks turned into months, and Margaret became as much a part of the Harper Ranch as the worn barn or the wide fields that stretched beyond the hills. Her strength carried them through the early frosts of winter. She fixed leaking roofs, milked cows when Daniel was too weary, and taught Lily how to bake bread from scratch. But not everyone welcomed her presence. In town, whispers followed them when Daniel brought Margaret along for supplies. Some women clucked their tongues, saying she was too big, too rough, not a proper lady. Others hinted that Daniel had moved on too soon after his wife's passing. Daniel kept his head high, but he noticed how Margaret's shoulders stiffened each time the gossip reached her ears. One cold morning, Daniel found her in the barn, mending a broken harness. Her eyes were red, though she tried to hide it. "You shouldn't pay them any mind," he said gently. "I don't," she replied too quickly, her voice catching. Daniel crouched beside her, his rough hand covering hers. "Margaret, you've done more for this ranch than anyone ever could. You've given Lily her smile back. Don't you ever doubt your worth here." She looked at him then, tears brimming but unshed. "I just don't want to be the reason Lily gets mocked. She deserves better." The wind howled across the dusty plains as if it carried the voices of those long gone. Daniel Harper stood at the edge of his worn-out porch, staring at the endless horizon. His ranch had once been a place of laughter, where his late wife's humming mixed with the sounds of cattle and the giggles of their little girl. Now, it was nothing but silence, broken only by the creak of wood and the low whinnies of horses searching for food. Daniel was a man known for his strength, not in the way of broad shoulders or hardened fists, but in the quiet resilience of someone who refused to bend under the weight of life's blows. Still, even the strongest men had their breaking point, and Daniel had reached his. His debts were piling up. The bank had already sent 2 warnings. Winter was on its way, and the fields were bare. That morning, as the sky lit up with strokes of orange and gold, Daniel's daughter, Lily, tugged at his sleeve. She was only 8, with hair the color of wheat and eyes too wise for her years. "Papa," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with worry, "are we gonna lose the ranch?" Her words pierced him deeper than any creditor's threats. He forced a smile, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Not as long as I'm standing, sweetheart," he said, though the lie tasted bitter. The truth was, Daniel didn't know how much longer he could stand. He had sold nearly everything of value, bartered with neighbors for supplies, and worked from dawn to well past dusk. Yet, it was never enough. Every night, as Lily drifted to sleep clutching her ragged doll, Daniel sat by the fire with his head in his hands, wondering how much more he could give before he had nothing left. One evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the yard, a wagon appeared on the dirt road. Its wheels groaned, and its horses moved with weary steps. Daniel stepped forward, wary but curious. Strangers rarely came this far out. From the wagon stepped a woman. She was tall, with broad shoulders and hands rough from labor. Her face, though stern at first glance, softened when her eyes met Lily's, who had peeked out from behind her father. The woman carried only a small suitcase, her dress plain but neat, as if she had chosen simplicity over vanity. "My name is Margaret," she said, her voice steady. "I heard you're in need of help." Daniel frowned. "And who told you that?" "Your pastor," she replied simply. "He said you're a good man, but one carrying too heavy a burden alone." Daniel's jaw tightened. Pride was the last thing he had left, and he clung to it fiercely. "I didn't ask for charity." Margaret didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "It's not charity. It's survival. And sometimes, survival means letting others stand beside you." Her words struck something inside him. For a long moment, he said nothing, the weight of his stubbornness pressing against the truth in her voice. Lily, however, had no hesitation. She slipped.